I joined a volunteer search net because a teenager wandered off near the swamp and I own a decent handheld radio. I packed extra batteries, a poncho, and a thermal blanket, and my plan was to relay locations from the trailhead while the ground teams swept grids. I wasn't trying to be noble. I just couldn't sit on my couch and refresh updates like a coward. My wife watched me load the pack and told me I was not going into that swamp at night like some dumb action figure. I snapped back. She snapped back harder, and I left with that pissed off energy that makes you do stupid things just to prove a point. The antenna kept snagging my jacket zipper every time I moved, and it got on my nerves so bad I almost ripped the whole thing off. The trailhead was lit by truck headlights and cheap work lights. People talked too loud, like volume could scare fear away. The kid's mom sat on a tailgate staring into nothing. The coordinator told me to stay near the access road, keep comms clean, and not wander off. I nodded like I was responsible. I wasn't. Around dusk, a weak voice crackled over my radio, thin, broken, saying help, and a set of numbers that sounded like coordinates. It wasn't chatter. It wasn't some guy joking. It hit my ear like someone whispering right into the speaker. I looked up, waiting for everyone else to react. Nothing. I keyed up, called the dispatcher, and said I heard a voice with possible chords. He came back flat and irritated. He didn't hear a damn thing on his end. Another volunteer on the net didn't hear it either. I did, clear as if the person was standing behind me. I tried to be rational. I changed channels, checked squelch, turned the volume up until static hissed like steam. The voice came again. Help. Then the numbers again, same rhythm, like the speaker was reading them off. I called it in a second time and got that same answer. Nothing heard. Stopped clogging the net unless I had visual. The coordinator wandered over and asked what I was doing. I told him I had a possible location. He asked if anyone else heard it. I said no. His face tightened like I'd admitted I was hallucinating. He told me not to chase ghosts and reminded me, real slow, if I got hurt, resources would peel off the missing kid to deal with me. I said something nasty back because my pride was already up and I hated the way he talked to me. He told me, fine, stand there and log comms, and walked off. The voice hit again, and this time it sounded closer, like the signal jumped right over the swamp and landed in my skull. I started moving down the canal path to get a better read, telling myself I was still basically at the trailhead, still doing my job. I stopped every few steps, held the radio out, turned my body like that would change anything. The flashlight showed brush, muck, and flat black patches where the ground just disappeared. Every time I swung the beam, I caught little white flicks off the surface, bugs, foam, whatever, but after a few minutes it started to feel like the swamp was blinking back. The voice came again, then suddenly sounded farther away, like somebody dragged the mic down a hallway. The numbers changed by 1 digit. That should have been my sign it was bullshit. Instead, I treated it like a breadcrumb. I got angry. Angry at the dispatcher for not hearing it. Angry at the coordinator for acting like I was a liability. Angry at myself for not writing the numbers down the first time. That anger pushed me past the point where I should have turned around. I keyed up one more time, tried to pass the chords, stumbled over them, and got shut down again. The coordinator saw me pacing and told me to stop freelancing. I told him to go fuck himself. Not loud enough for the whole lot, but loud enough for him. His eyes went hard, and he pointed back toward the lights like I was a dog. I turned away before I said something that would get me kicked out, and I kept walking because I wanted to be right more than I wanted to be safe. The path narrowed. The ground softened. My boots sank, and I felt cold seep in at the ankle. I told myself I'd go 10 more steps, then turn back. The voice came again, clearer, urgent, help, then the numbers. And I stepped off trail like an idiot, following sound like it was a string tied to my ribs. The first step off the path swallowed my foot. I yanked it free and nearly fell. The second step caught on a root and twisted my knee. I cursed out loud. The radio hissed and popped. I kept moving because turning around felt like losing. Then everything went quiet at once. Not movie quiet, Just the background noise dropping out so fast my ears felt stuffed. Frogs that had been going nonstop just stopped. Even the bugs sounded farther away. I stood there with my light shaking and my boot half stuck, and I finally got that cold warning feeling like my body knew something my brain didn't want to admit. The radio crackled again. The voice changed. It said my name. Not sir, not buddy. My actual name, the one only my wife uses when she's pissed. I felt in my stomach first like I'd swallowed a rock. I froze, then I backed up fast and my heels slid. I went down hard, slammed my hand into something solid under the surface. Plastic. I grabbed it thinking it was a branch or trash, and I needed leverage. It came up with a nasty suction pop, and it was a child's shoe. Little sneaker. Half buried, laces rotted, tongue stiff with muck. I stared at it like it could talk. I dropped it, and it sank out of sight like it didn't want to be found. The radio said my name again, calmer, slower, like whoever was calling wasn't worried. Like they knew I'd listen. I scrambled backward, got my feet under me, and I started moving toward the path, not running because you can't run in that terrain without eating dirt, but pushing hard, yanking my legs free, ripping my poncho on branches, breathing loud enough to give myself away. The voice kept calling, same tone, using my name like a handle. It didn't sound lost. It sounded patient. I hit the trail edge and stumbled on a firmer ground, and then I ran. I ran like a grown man, running from something he can't explain without sounding insane. I burst back into the trailhead lights, soaked up to the shins, and shaking like I'd been hit. People turned. The coordinator stormed up and grabbed my arm. I jerked away on reflex, and he started tearing into me, calling me a selfish dumbass, asking what the hell I thought I was doing. The deputy asked if I was hurt. Somebody shoved a bottle of water at me like that fixed anything. My mouth opened, and nothing came out that made sense. I didn't want to say the radio said my name. I didn't want to say I found a kid's shoe. I didn't want them to decide the best move was sending more people into the dark because one guy got spooked. So I did the one thing I could do to keep myself from feeling crazy. I opened my radio log. I'd barely used it before. The screen was smeared from my wet thumb. I scrolled and my heart started beating in my ears. There were transmissions listed that I hadn't made. My call sign, my ID, my voice, begging for help, and the timestamps were wrong. Not clock drift wrong, 10 minutes in the future wrong. My own voice was sitting there in the log like it already happened, like time was a joke and I was the punchline. I stared at it until my eyes burned. I looked up at the coordinator mid-rant, and I could tell if I showed him the screen, he'd either laugh or he'd panic and do something stupid. Either way, I'd become the story, not the missing kid. So elite. I said I slipped. I said I got turned around. I took the chewing out. I let the coordinator act like he'd just saved the whole operation from my stupidity. I stayed quiet the rest of the night, kept my radio off as much as I could, and every time someone keyed up on the net, my skin crawled because I didn't want my voice out there again. They called the search at some point and resumed at first light. They found the missing kid alive the next morning, miles away, nowhere near my coordinates. Cold and scratched up, but alive. People celebrated like it erased the night. They patted backs, took pictures, acted like the swamp was just a backdrop for their good deed. I stood there and felt sick because that meant whatever spoke on my radio wasn't the kid. It didn't need a rescue. It just needed someone to follow. I drove home with mud on my boots and my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. My wife met me at the door with that mix of anger and relief and asked if the kid was okay. I said yes. She asked if I was okay. I said yes again because I didn't have another answer. I didn't tell her about the future stamp calls. I didn't tell anyone. I just took the batteries out of my radio and left it in a drawer because sometimes the swamp doesn't need you to get lost. Sometimes it just wants you to answer. I took the Great Dismal call because the county wanted readings after odor complaints, and they pay overtime if you go alone. I tossed a handheld gas meter, spare filters, and a cheap headlamp in my bag. My plan was to walk a short service path, grab 3 samples, and be back in my truck before the light dropped. I went solo because my partner had a kid thing. I kept chewing stale mint gum to cover the swamp taste. My supervisor didn't even pretend it was optional. He'd already decided I was the warm body for it, and he liked the part where go alone meant he didn't have to schedule anyone else. I asked for a second person anyway, because wetlands are bullshit when something's off, and he hit me with that tired line about budgets, and it's probably nothing. I didn't argue long. That's on me. I wanted the overtime, and I wanted to be done. I parked at a gravel turnout with a bent sign and a chain that didn't stop anybody. I checked the meter, watched it settle, clicked the headlamp on even though it wasn't dark yet, and stepped onto the service trail. It looked like a normal footpath until you put weight on it and felt the ground flex under the leaves, like the whole place sat on a soak mattress. The air tasted like metal and old pond. My boots kept making that wet suction sound. I kept moving fast because if you slow down out there, you start thinking about how far you are from anyone and how easy it would be to go missing under a foot of mud. About 10 minutes in, the air changed. Not thicker, meaner. My meter ticked once, then started climbing like it got excited. I stopped, held it out, waited for it to calm down. It didn't. The numbers kept stepping up like they were counting. I told myself it was humidity and kept moving because I wanted to finish fast and go home. Then I saw a low patch of ground breathing gray wisps through wet leaves, like smoke was leaking out of the earth. It wasn't a campfire. It wasn't trash burning. It was just dirt and moss pushing out a slow, steady exhale. I shifted left to go around it, kept my weight light, and the surface still gave under my boot with a soft collapse. My foot sank and heat rolled up my shin so fast I jerked like I'd touched a stove. The smell hit, burnt peat and sour swamp water, like someone set a compost pile on fire and smothered it. I yanked my leg back, and the moss tore open into a dark hole that looked too clean, like a mouth. No flame, no glow, nothing dramatic. It just exhaled hot smoke right into my face. I didn't even get a chance to turn away. It filled my nose and mouth and the back of my throat, and my lungs locked like they decided breathing was a bad idea. I hacked, swallowed smoke, and staggered blind. The headlamp beam bounced off fog and reeds and made shapes that weren't there. I tried to blink it clear and my eyes just poured. The meter screamed now, that full alarm that makes your brain go red. I tried to step backward and my heel punched through another thin crust. The ground didn't crack like ice, it folded like wet cardboard. My boot dropped and I felt empty space under it, and I got this horrible flash of sinking into something hot and soft and not coming back out. I ripped my foot free and the rubber came up steaming. I kept coughing, but the coughs pulled more smoke in, and each breath felt hotter than the last, like I was inhaling from a dryer vent full of ash. Standing made me dizzy. The world tilted. My ears rang. I tried to follow my own footprints and realized the water was already filling them in, smoothing them out like the swamp was wiping the trail behind me. I fumbled for my phone with shaking fingers, got nothing but a dead bar. Of course, I told myself to run anyway, and my legs didn't cooperate. My knees went loose. I dropped the meter without meaning to. It smacked into the mud, still screaming, and I went down on my hands because it was either crawl or faceplant into whatever was breathing under that moss. My palms sank into cold muck, and that cold made the heat feel worse, like my body couldn't pick a temperature to die at. I crawled. I didn't crawl like a brave guy in a movie either. I crawled like a panicking idiot, dragging my knees, scraping my shins, trying not to put my weight on anything that looked too flat. I kept my head low because lifting it made the dizziness slam me. I gagged, spat, and what came out was black. Not mud. Soot. That's the moment the whole thing stopped being weird smell in a swamp and turned into this is fucking dangerous. The smoke kept leaking up behind me with that steady, patient push, like it didn't care if I escaped as long as it got a bite. I crawled toward where I thought the trail was, but the fog and reeds turned everything into the same gray wall. The headlamp made it worse, just a bright cone bouncing off wet air. I killed it and crawled by feel, hands searching for that packed strip where other boots had pressed the ground down. My mouth filled with slime, and I couldn't swallow without coughing, so it just ran out, mixing with mud on my chin. My chest hurt. Every inhale scraped. I got turned around once, I know I did, because I felt my own knee hit the drop meter and heard its alarm muffled under muck, and that meant I'd circled back toward the bad spot like some stupid moth. That scared me more than the heat. I slapped at the ground, found a buried board edge, and hooked my fingers under it like it was a lifeline. I pulled, dragged myself onto it, and kept dragging elbows and knees until the air stopped tasting hot. I didn't stand up right away. I just lay there on the trail board shaking, coughing into the leaves, trying to get one clean breath without that burnt peat taste. When I finally got up, I moved fast, half stumbling, one hand out, staying on the packed strip like it was a tightrope. I didn't go back for the meter. I didn't go back for the samples. I didn't go back for shit. I just kept moving until the trees thinned and I saw the pale line of the gravel turnout. I got to my truck and yanked the door open so hard I banged my knee on the frame, and I didn't even feel it. I fell into the seat and slammed the door and sat there coughing like my lungs were trying to climb out of my throat. I flipped the visor mirror down and stared. In my truck mirror, my nose and mouth were black, not from dirt, soot. It sat on my nostrils. It stained the corners of my lips. I wiped once with my sleeve, and the fabric came away gray like I'd been sticking my face in a chimney. I turned the key, blasted the fan, and cracked the windows even though it was getting cold because I couldn't stand the idea of that smoke trapped in the cab with me. The drive back felt too long. I kept tasting ash. I kept coughing into my fist at stoplights, trying not to puke in the cup holder. When I got home, I stood over the sink and hacked until my eyes watered again. And what I brought up wasn't normal spit. It was thick, dark slime that stank like swamp rot and burnt dirt. I rinsed, and the smell still clung. I slept like shit. I woke up coughing. I coughed up swamp stinking slime for 2 days after. It clung to my throat like glue. My chest felt bruised from the inside. I didn't go to urgent care because I knew what they'd say. Smoke inhalation, monitor symptoms, come back if you can't breathe. And I could breathe. Technically, I just felt like garbage and I couldn't stop thinking about that ground giving way like paper. I filed the report anyway, because I didn't want them sending some teenager out there with a clipboard. I wrote it straight. Elevated readings, visible gray vapor, heat source under surface, crust collapse, smoke exposure. My supervisor skimmed it and got pissy that I abandoned equipment. I told him he could go fetch it himself if he wanted to argue. He tried to spin it into me being careless, like the swamp was my fault. The county didn't want to hear danger. They wanted a neat label that fit in a spreadsheet. The report I filed got labeled localized smolder, like it was a small thing, like the ground didn't try to cook me alive without ever showing a flame. I signed up to clear storm debris in the Great Dismal because I needed service hours and I like working with my hands. I didn't want some feel-good group thing with matching shirts. I just needed a log sheet with my name on it and a couple hours I could point to when my supervisor asked why I was still short. The group meetup got canceled last minute. Some weather email that hit my inbox after I'd already packed. So I went anyway because I'd already driven out, already promised myself I'd get it done, and I was pissed enough to be stubborn. I packed a folding saw, gloves, and a bottle of water, and my plan was to cut one fallen limb off a side trail, mark the rest for rangers, and head back before the bugs got unbearable. I went alone because the group meetup got canceled last minute. I hiked in maybe 15 minutes. The air sat heavy. Everything smelled like wet wood and old leaves and that sour swamp funk that sticks to the back of your throat. My boots squeaked in the mud. The mosquitoes found the gap under my collar and went straight for it. I kept slapping at my neck and trying not to get pissed because anger burns energy and I was already alone out there with no one to complain to. I told myself I'd be in and out. No hero stuff. I found the first fallen limb where it blocked a narrow spur trail. I knelt, braced my boot, and worked the saw through. Push, pull, push, pull. Sap stuck to my glove. The limb dropped with a wet smack and threw black water at my shins. I dragged the chunks off the path and stacked them like I'd been taught, trying to make it look like a proper job, even though no one was there to grade me. I moved to a second branch a little deeper in. That one sat half over the path, half sunk in the reeds, so I had to lean out and saw at an angle. My shoulders burned. Sweat ran into my eyes. Bugs crawled into the corners of my mouth when I breathed. I kept sawing anyway, because the whole point of going was to feel useful for once, to do something simple that didn't involve paperwork or excuses. I was halfway through when I heard a cough behind me. Too dry, too human. Not a bird, not a frog, not a wet hack. A throat clear like somebody did it on purpose. My body locked up before my head caught up. I turned and saw a guy in camo standing knee-deep off trail like he'd been there a while. He wasn't moving like a hiker who just walked up. He looked planted. No buck, no water bottle, no phone in his hand, no lost guy vibe. His clothes were the kind of camo that tries hard, like he wanted to blend in, but he stood in open reed water where nothing blends. He stared at my saw first, then my hands, like he was measuring what I could do with them. I said, "Hey," because that's what you do when you're trying to make weird normal. He didn't answer. He didn't even do that polite nod people do on trails. He just shifted his weight and kept watching me, eyes flat, mouth closed, like he was waiting for me to finish the cut so my arms would be tired. I set the saw down slow, like any sudden move would be a challenge. I told him I was just doing volunteer cleanup and I was heading out. I tried to step around him to the narrow, dry strip of trail behind him. He slid sideways and blocked it. He didn't touch me, didn't raise his voice, didn't act aggressive in any way you can point to later. He just put his body where my body needed to go. The dry strip was maybe a foot wide. On both sides, it dropped into black water and soft mud that looked like it would swallow a boot and keep it. My brain started doing math it didn't want to do. I was alone. The meetup got canceled. No one expected me back at a certain time. Out there, sound eyes into trees and water. I hated myself for coming. I hated myself for not turning around sooner. I also got angry, hot and stupid because I could feel him doing it on purpose, like he practiced blocking people without making an incident. I said again that I was leaving. He still didn't answer. He lifted his hand and pointed deeper into the trees with two fingers like a command. Not "over there's the trail," not "watch out," just a flat directive. "Come here. Go there. Do it." I backed up instead. My heel sank, mud tugging like a hand, and I almost went down. I caught myself on a root and looked up, and that's when I saw what he was guarding. A crude lean-to, sat hidden in reeds, low and dirty, the kind of thing you don't see unless you're already in the wrong place. Beside it was a pile of animal bones stacked neat like somebody took time with it. Raccoon, deer, maybe dog. Fresh ones still had sinew. Flies working like a job. There was a smell under the swamp smell, sweet and wrong, like old meat in summer. My stomach flipped. I remember this weird detail. One bone pile had a collar tag tangled in it, little rectangle of metal catching light between flies. That's when the whole scene stopped being creepy camp and turned into something personal. Somebody spate. Somebody's dog that never came home. The camo guy finally spoke. One sharp sentence. It wasn't friendly. I don't repeat it because it wasn't the kind of threat you laugh off later. It wasn't even shouted. It was calm, like he was stating a rule that already existed, and I was the idiot for not knowing it. My throat went tight. I could hear my own blood in my ears over the bugs. I grabbed my saw and held it up like an idiot's shield. My hand shook so hard the blade wobbled. I told him no, because that's all I had. One word. I tried to keep my voice steady and told him to back off. He just stared at me, then glanced past me, like he was checking how far I was from the trailhead, like he was checking how long he had. He took a step. I took a step back. Mud sucked to my boots. I felt myself start to slide into panic where your body goes heavy and clumsy. I thought about my phone. No service. I thought about screaming. Who the fuck would hear it? I thought about the bones and that collar tag, and I got this flash of pure rage, like you don't get to do this and just stand there smug about it. I could feel him waiting for me to hesitate so he could close the space. I didn't want to find out what "come here" meant, so I ran. I didn't plan it. My legs just fired and I went for the closest patch of higher ground, splashing, slipping, ripping skin on roots. The saw banged my thigh with every step. I heard him behind me, not crashing like an animal, moving fast but controlled, like he'd waded that water 100 times and knew exactly where it wouldn't pull him down. My boot caught in something, and for half a second, I felt myself stuck, and I swear my whole life went white with fear. I yanked hard, left my sock wet and half off inside the boot, and kept moving because stopping felt like dying. Something whistled past my ear and smacked a tree. Metal on wood. A hard, dead thunk that rang in my teeth. Not a stick, not a rock. Thrown metal. I flinched so hard I almost ate it. I didn't stop. I shoved through reeds and brush until my arms burned, not caring about scratches, not caring about my boots filling with swamp water. I kept expecting another throw to hit the back of my head. Every second, I waited for the weight of him landing on my back and driving me down into that black water. I hit the main path and just bolted like my life depended on it because, yeah, it did. Mosquitoes turned into a blur. My lungs seized. I tasted mud and blood. I didn't look back until I saw the gravel lot through the trees and the stupid little park sign like it meant safety. I made it to my car, shaking so hard I couldn't get my keys in. My hands were slick with sweat and swamp. I dropped the keys once and had to crawl for them like a coward, eyes flicking to the tree line. I yanked the door open and half fell into the seat, slammed it, locked it again like that mattered, then just sat there gulping air and listening for footsteps on gravel. I looked down and realized my left hand was bare. I'd been wearing both gloves when I started cutting. Somewhere in that sprint, I'd ripped one off without noticing, like my body paid a toll just to keep moving. The thought of him picking it up made bile rise in my throat. That's when I saw the windshield. Under the wiper, someone had left my own glove. I hadn't dropped it. The fingers were turned inside out, muddy and wet, like a joke about what they could have done if they felt like it.